In the year 918, a great battle is said to have taken place on the banks of the River Tyne, near the small village of CORBRIDGE. On the one side of the field stood the forces of Constantine II, the veteran king of Scotland, who looked to defend his borders against foreign invaders. Not from the English to the south this time, but from the Norse across the sea. Unusually for the time, the Scottish king was accompanied by an Anglo-Saxon ruler, the former lord of Bernicia, Eldred I, who had been evicted from his own lands in 914, and now sought refuge at Constantine's court. The fact that Scotsmen and Englishmen had actually set aside their centuries-long grievances to do battle together against a common foe says a great deal about this new threat. Facing them on the other side of the field at Corbridge was Ragnall Ímair, one of the foremost Vikings of his day, and a man feared throughout Northern Europe. He was accompanied by a great host of followers from all over the British Isles and beyond. Norsemen, Danes, Norse Gaels, even some Irishmen, and they had amassed behind Ragnall for one reason: he won battles and he gave riches. A prominent member of the Ímair dynasty of Dublin, which had dominated the Irish Sea since the time of his grandfather Ímair some 50 years before, who may have been Ivar the Boneless. Ragnall, who styled himself the Sea King, had ravaged much of the British Isles during his lifetime, ruling over and raiding territories in modern-day Scotland, Ireland, Wales and England, and amassing a huge fortune in the process. And now he looks to forge a kingdom for himself in Northumbria. Although little is known of Ragnall's early life, as a prominent member of the Ímair, he is presumed to have been amongst the Vikings expelled from Dublin in 902 by a coalition of Irish kings who rose up against them. Those who survived the battles against the Irish in that year are said to have split into several different groups, some travelling to France, some to England, some to the Scottish Isles, and some to Wales. Although it isn't for certain which group Ragnall travelled with, it seems that he ended up either in southern Scotland or in the Isle of Man, presumably as a young man looking to make a name for himself. His actual parentage is unknown, and because of his close association with his grandfather Ímair, rather than his father as was the usual tradition, it may be assumed that his father was one of Ímair's sons, who never held power of his own. This unclear parentage and the early exile from the fairly well-established stronghold of Dublin may go some way to explaining the apparent restlessness of the young warrior, and his desire to carve out a new kingdom for himself as a self-made man. It wasn't long before Scandinavians returned in significant numbers to Ireland. In many areas they likely never left. Artir the Black, for example, a Norse jarl, later closely associated with Ragnall, is said to have founded the settlement of Waterford in 914. The earliest mention of Ragnall in the Irish annals is also in this year, when he is described as destroying the fleet of Barid mac Otir near his island kingdom of Man, and subsequently taking the throne of Man for himself. Over the next 3 years, it seems that Ragnall, along with his brother Sitric, another prominent grandson of Ímair, and a war leader in his own right, each gathered their forces together for a large-scale invasion of their family's former lands in and around Dublin. In 917, they each sailed separate fleets to Ireland, with Ragnall travelling to Waterford and Sitric to Leinster. It was only because of Ragnall's timely intervention that Sitric was able to defeat the army of the Northern Uí the most powerful dynasty of Ireland at the time. Sitric became king of Dublin in the aftermath, and Ragnall, now enjoying more renown than ever, and likely more plunder than ever, travelled across the sea to Northumbria, an area with a strong Scandinavian influence, stretching back half a century, with the intention of installing himself as the new ruler. This was the time period in which Eldred of Bernicia was apparently ousted from his realm, and subsequently allied himself with Constantine II of Scotland against Ragnall. The ensuing battle at Corbridge was a brutal affair, likely a last-ditch effort by the Scots and the Northern English to break Scandinavian power in the north. According to the Annals of Ulster, the Norse army divided itself into 4 columns, each led by a powerful warlord in its own right, but all owing their ultimate loyalty to Ragnall. One by one, the Scots apparently managed to destroy each Norse column, including the one led by Artir the Black, who was killed during the fighting. Finally, just as all seemed lost for the Norsemen, Ragnall appeared with his own contingent, ambushing the Scots, putting them to flight and winning the day. Although he had lost large numbers of men, Ragnall acted quickly and decisively, descending upon York to capitalise upon Scandinavian loyalties and having himself crowned as king. Despite his victory at Corbridge, which in actuality was costly at best, he was never fully accepted as king in Northumbria. In truth, the north had changed a great deal since the time of the Great Heathen Army 50 years earlier. The majority of its inhabitants were Christians now, and despite being Scandinavian in origin, They apparently resented having a pagan warlord rule over them like their grandfathers had. During his short time as king in Northumbria, Ragnall was one of a dying breed, and in 921 he did die, only to be replaced as king by his brother Sihtric. Ultimately, despite sporadic bouts of conquest in the century to come, the time of the Norsemen was coming to an end in England, which would be unified into a single nation in 927. In the rest of Great Britain, however, the situation was different. In Ireland, the Ímair and Scandinavians would continue to rule for a century or more, and in the Scottish Isles and the Isle of Man for much longer.